really not 365 days. It's 365 days and change. And when we have a leap year, we get to spend the change.
Got it.
That is such a tidy explanation.
That was like a tight 5 stand-up
Yeah.
joke, but it was so fast.
We spend the change. All right, happy leap year. Welcome to class.
I accidentally took a glass yesterday in front of
Oh,
Oh! Common tumor.
All right.
I have you.
I know, I'm stealing glasses and everything.
So you came here and used the space for a massage for your friend?
Probably low and I didn't exchange.
Is he still working up points?
Having I don't even know where that is. He's having like family drama, so he can't even like work at home. He usually works out of his tent.
Okay. But he's still working towards his license, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Let's drop in. I fixed the table. Now I can use it. All right. Welcome. Today we are continuing in on our massage applications. We're going to deal with some of the circulatory system, lymphatic system applications, stuff like that, wrap it up. And we're closing towards the end of our more structured sequence in this course. And after today, we'll be able to spend a lot more time kind of looking at exam prep and answering questions that you guys might have lingering through, doing some review. So looking forward to that. Let's, as usual, drop into the body. Find that sensation in the feet. Find the sensation in the knees. Allow your nervous system to shift awareness to that interior set of sensory information. Slow down the mind, slow down the external awareness, and turn up that internal awareness. Drive that focus through the feet and let it sync up with your breath, moving into that wave sensation. Cresting at the crown of the head and dropping back down through the arms. You guys have gotten so good at this now. You can feel it almost as a sort of neurological home, a space that you've practiced enough that you can call it up just by triggering that sequence of awareness and that breath to find your center. So let's invoke that magical spell now. Give our bodies a few minutes, even 2 minutes of holding this awareness will shift your state and allow your sympathetic nervous system to calm down and recalibrate. It may take 10 minutes of doing this for your endocrine system to really catch up. But if you ever take the time to focus in on the body and build up this state, keep accelerating it, keep accelerating that gratitude and love and internal clarity for as much as an hour, you'll find yourself in a position to select your emotional and cognitive state out of whatever you can imagine. And the more we practice that, the stronger reference we have, the faster that we can go into our chosen states at will. So this is an exercise of will. Of building the person that you want to be. Let that body move and flow through any of those spaces that are calling for attention. Now that you've got your inside awareness turned up, find those little spaces that could use a lifting and dropping back into place. And rejoin us in the room. Awesome. Okay. Welcome, everybody. So our main focus today is looking at that practical application. We're going to zoom in on circulation stuff. Last time we spent a lot of time on the neurological impact of touch-based therapies and all those ideas of counter-irritation, nerve entrapment, that impact on the cerebellum, jostling, and the recalibration of our position in space. Did you guys get to check that out at all? Did you play around with like the mental state that you evoke when you're paying attention to where your mind is following that body experience during your hands-on practices?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like when I take my glasses off, I feel like I have part of that going on too. Like,
Kind of a condition of remove the glasses and
Yeah.
your external awareness is going to drop down a bit naturally.
focus.
Yeah.
Like my body's prepared to bump into more things or like not see you here. So
Absolutely.
It just kinda, like, it does its own thing.
You gotta nest back into that. Yeah, I definitely also kind of found myself just extra aware of using those jostling techniques after we had gone into more depth talking about that. Super effective. I often do incorporate a lot of that, but was really just thinking about it more. So remind me a bit about our circulation. What do we know about the impact of massage on our circulation?
It increases blood flow,
Uh-huh.
helps with lymphatic drainage.
Yes. So we've got blood is one type of circulation. Lymph is another kind of class of circulation. Different groups of fluids. And so when we dive into our massage therapy bodywork patterns, we're going to see impact on the blood in the sense of the arterial flow and as well through the venous return flow, right? So when we are applying pressure, especially if we're following the directionality of a specific fluid flow, if we're trying to engage about the fluid directly, that supporting the circulatory system, if we're following the arterial flow out down the limbs, then that'll kind of impact the speed of that liquid transit there. If we're supporting the venous flow coming back up towards the core with our sweeping movements and our actual kind of squeegee application of the movement of the hands, then we're going to get that support of the venous flow. And usually we'll find that supporting the venous flow is more supportive generally, right? That we often talk about, we want to sweep towards the heart, sweep towards the core, because the arteries already have all of that loaded power of the heart, just pushing everything away. It's at its full pressure leaving the heart, but the venous flow returning is where we can use some of that extra support.
I have a question about
Yes.
the atrium and ventricles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the heart itself.
Right, left. Are those like chambers that are structured differently than veins? Like they're bigger or?
Yes, yeah. So I don't want you to too much depend on my illustrative powers for the understanding, but you'll have an atria, a ventricle, and then the passage out to the lungs, which is technically going to be a deoxygenated artery, right? And then imagine we've got a lung here. Then it's coming back in and processing the atrium and ventricle. And so they're pretty large and they have really substantial valves moving through them. And so your heart itself is going to be around the scale of your fist. And so it's kind of quartered up, and mostly the interior is open chamber for those action of the blood flow. Yeah?
Well, I didn't know if they were like right outside on the exterior of the heart, but they're inside.
Yeah, it's the chambers of the interior of the heart, which is, because it's a pump, it's largely open space inside of it. So the structure of the heart is the muscle that can do that pump action, whoom, 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 right? But the action of the blood moving through there is taking up some space, getting passed into the next chamber, going into the lungs for oxygenation, returning to the heart, passing through a valve into the next chamber, and then dropping back into the aorta to be distributed through the rest of the body. Great question. Okay, so that's just all happening through the fluid movement. When we are using like short pumping or gliding actions, this is going to have the most impact on the blood flow, because you're like really, when you think about the squeegee type action, right, you're going to have a stronger amount of fluid movement if you're kind of cutting off the pressure to, you're going across it and pulling the direction that you want it to go. And if you're really light, you're going to skip across it and leave some drops behind on the shower wall, right? Lymphatic drainage is a little bit different because it is distributed all the way through that interstitial fluid through the deep tissue as well. And we're still going to think about mostly the more superficial lymphatic capillaries as being what we can effectively impact. Something that is really fascinating about lymphatic flow is that the energy released as we clear out lymph is actually really impressive. That the cells that are kind of surrounded by material that hasn't been uptaken by the lymph system are having a kind of like swampy, boggy experience, and like having to wait longer to access the particles that are drifting across those cell plasma membranes in order to grab what they need from the interstitial fluid, right? But if we sweep all the interstitial fluid out and it just replaces with relatively clear, fresh fluid, then those cells are actually going to pick up their rate of metabolism pretty significantly, such that like even like 5 minutes of full body dry brushing, where you're really getting that lymphatic effect sweeping towards the heart, and you just tend to clear all of this superficial lymphatic uptake pretty quickly. 5 minutes of that, you're gonna hit brain metabolism energy difference that's about equivalent to 200 milligrams or like a cup of coffee. Yeah, people actually get great success with breaking a coffee habit, replacing it with a dry brushing or like self-massage routine in the morning, and it doesn't take super long at all. It's really cool.
It's because you're moving those particles at a faster rate that they would normally travel.
Right, you're getting them to metabolize out of the way, so that especially the waste particles are not mucking up the immediate environment of the cells, so they can be more responsive generally. So that's pretty cool. Lymphatic drainage procedures are really similar to venous return. You're going to approximately be using those same directional flow stuff. Are you guys doing any lymphatic drainage specific stuff in your hands-on portion? No. Okay. We might have talked about this a little bit, but I'll just give kind of the baseline concept with lymphatic flow. Is we always talked about where I grew up, we had the ferry boats crossing between the peninsulas and little jutting bits of land. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's why.
Uh-huh. And so when you have a ferry boat, a car ferry, right? You're gonna drive the cars onto the ferry, they're gonna enter, and they're gonna actually drive all the way through the ferry and park at the front. So the first cars to get on the boat are also gonna need to be the first cars to disembark, because this is a double-ended vessel, right? And it's going across the water, and it's delivering this front end and emptying out that direction. And we want to kind of replicate this with our lymphatic flow. So when we're jumping in there, we need to unpark these cars first. We're going to clear up the closest or most proximal zone towards the heart, and then scoop gradually segments that are more distal into that zone, and continue to clear that upper level, right? And so we're building that fluid flow all the way through. So just exactly what I did on my arm, like maybe a little bit more thorough, repeating that on all of your limbs and kind of working through your torso, just self-massage real quick in the morning, totally dry is fine. That's what you're gonna get that like really fast lymphatic uptake. And it's also super great stimulus for the nervous system to just get your calibration kicked off for the day.
I'm gonna be there in like 3 weeks.
On my front end. Yeah? You going back?
Whidbey Island.
Awesome. Cool. So those are some of our big pieces, that arterial flow, venous return flow, or lymphatic drainage, and just generally fluid movement. Whether or not it's in the lymphatic system, getting that interstitial fluid kind of squished around really opens up the pockets of fluid and gets them a little bit more organized, where cells are able to kind of respond and maneuver into more appropriate spacing. And that connective tissue material that is locking everything in place has a chance to kind of reorganize, pop open, and distribute more appropriately as the cells reorganize as well. So it is really lovely. Baseline points. So our effect on body fluids that we can kind of gather from our current research as it continues to come in is that we have a lot of mechanical impact on the water of the body. The body is mostly water, yeah. And so when we change the pressurization in small or large ways, anywhere in the body, we're going to get a significant impact there. As we squeeze and compress that fluid in the tissue, it stimulates the body to move and process the fluid and keep it moving along, following those like metabolic processes that are what the body is trying to do. We're just activating it, speeding it up a little bit. When we work with clients, we're able to say pretty confidently, based on our own experience, based on our training and observation, that we can expect these things to happen. Of course, there's always going to be individual cases where somebody responds a little bit differently. So being really tuned into what impact you're actually sensing on a tactile level yourself as a clinician, super important. And being aware, being responsive to the client's self-report of the experience that they're having is still really important, even if we're able to pretty much predict and expect these outcomes. Okay. Some of the other general effects of bodywork and massage therapy that we are able to generally look out for is that impact on respiration. As we enter that parasympathetic state, as we relax on the table, respiration is going to tend to become more organized. Our outer stimulus is having less impact on how we kind of mid-voluntary, involuntary mitigate our breath cycle, right? And so as we have less stimulus, our subconscious is going to do a more thorough job of drawing the diaphragm down and breathing from the belly instead of the chest automatically. People will also tend to be a little bit more aware of their breathing patterns and to support their own cognitive processing of their breath, and also to be more responsive to your suggestion that they breathe a little deeper. Does that make sense? Okay. And I do want to come back to respiration a little bit, but let's cover that cerebrospinal fluid circulation concept also. Has anybody had any craniosacral therapy?
I have.
Yeah?
Does that involve the vagal nerve, like activating like the specific?
Yeah, impact on the vagal nerve. Yeah. Yeah. The vagal nerve is super important because it is the innervation for a lot of the visceral organs. And so it has like a organizing effect as like kind of an overview position on what's happening in multiple different organ systems. So that's pretty important.
Isn't any like just back massage craniosacral therapy, or is it like completely different?
Yeah, so craniosacral therapy specifically, when people are like really trained in that, looks like very still. That there's some like light points but not trigger points. It would be like just soft resting, where you're really getting that targeted nerve uptake of like tuning up the definition of how much you're able to perceive. So it's going to be a lot on the face, through the head, through the neck, back of the neck, and into the sacrum also. So cranial sacral is the reference there. And there's a concept of passing the cerebrospinal fluid in a little bit deliberate way, where the cycling of that fluid that's inside of the spinal column, cushioning the central nervous system, right, is going to get some attention, a little bit better synchronized and processed. Same that we want to see on the other fluid impacts of body work. So we see a favorable impact on the autonomic nervous system activity. Right now, our research is not super conclusive on, like, the craniosacralists have their theory of why what they're doing has the effect that it does. And we do see the effect, but the research is not 100% intact to show that the theory of why it works is all the way worked out. Does that make sense? That it could be other mechanisms biologically that account for that. But we do have reliable parasympathetic nervous system activation. We have that like central nervous system, peripheral nervous system coordination coming into play. And we have the effect of the relaxation just on a fundamental level, that it is a very relaxing treatment to receive, where as opposed to like if you go in for structural work and they're picking up your leg and they're like doing some pin and stretch and like rocking you around and like maybe doing some abrupt movements or whatever, like you're not gonna like go into that trancey dream space. Craniosacral, you will much more reliably go into that trancey dream space, which is really defined by those theta brain waves. And that's where the nervous system is sending out those instructions to turn on repair, and that the cells are kind of discouraged from doing active metabolism and encouraged to do inward reconstruction and healing.
Are nerves filled with that spinal fluid?
It's similar. It's really similar. We wouldn't call it cerebrospinal fluid if it's not in the cerebrospinal cavity, right? But it is basically like an electrolyte serum. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's pretty great. And then related to that, those like more deep relaxation approaches, such as craniosacral, we also see some really great impacts on heart rate variability. Do you guys have any familiarity with that concept?
With heart rate, sorry?
Heart rate variability.
Being able to like regulate your beats per minute from like exercise?
That's a great guess.
Hearing someone could do like 4 beats a minute.
HRV. Yeah, we do have a certain amount of impact on like mentally taking over the speed of the heart. If we really practice that, we can have some impact on that. What we're talking about with heart rate variability is a really interesting concept though, which is that the beats of the heart have a certain spacing to them, right? And so while we might tend to assume that the more even the heartbeat, the healthier this is actually kind of a bad sign. That it turns out that the central nervous system relating to the heart should be communicating a lot of information. So we want there to be a variance of like, if you move your body and you create a slight increase in need for oxygen, or you have a thought go through your mind that releases some endocrine chemistry, have a slight increase in oxygen need to metabolize that, whatever. Like we actually want the heartbeat to be less regular. Like that overall we want to take the average numbers of the speed. Like if you're beating way too fast for the amount of exertion that you're putting out, that average rate of beats per second is a useful way to compare and contrast that. But when we listen in with more detail to the way that the heart is beating, we want it to be adjustable. We want it to be resilient and malleable, not locked into a mechanistic rate that is failing to adjust for the micro variances in oxygen demand throughout the body. Get that?
It's a musician, not a drum machine.
Yes, exactly. It's a musician, not a drum machine. We want the heart to be playing our life and tuned in to the way that we're living and the way that we're moving and interacting with our world.
That's like the idea of the flow of the ocean too, like when we're giving the basic strokes,
Mm-hmm.
going down and up, and then like also when we're doing scalenes, you want to not go too still at any one moment. You want to like keep movement,
Right,
so it's always circulating,
right.
or else you'll like start to palpate on some arteries.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in the neck, you don't want to lock into a trigger point,
Right. Then
still point.
carotid is under
On the
sternum,
carotid,
sternum
yeah.
is blah, blah,
Right.
boom, 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 yeah.
So heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is going to be discernibly improved during massage, towards the end of a massage. If you stop to measure heart rate variability, really nice improvement. And this is all of the like immediate, these things that we're talking about that are related to how the nervous system is responding on the large scale, how the heart is responding. These are all things that also are going to activate with meditation as people gain more practice. So like maybe the first time if somebody is like, I'm going to start a meditation practice to finally start dealing with my anxiety, and they're going to lay down and they're actually going to kind of freak themselves out the first few times. So, okay, so like let's talk about people who are a little bit more advanced in their practice that have learned to trust the process of just waiting for the body, learned how to stop producing that cognitive jab, jab, jab the whole time, and can get the body talking instead more or less efficiently, right? Which doesn't take all that many repeats to practice if you have reasonable support and guidance and like you know where you're going. Obviously, body work is a total cheat code for meditation because you're going to automatically get yanked into the state that is the most active functional place to spend meditative brainwaves. But if you're practiced in that way and you're able to start that neurological process that's the foundation of what's great about meditation on your own, you're going to get a lot of these same results: heart rate variability improvement, general circulation improvement, those craniosacral impacts of relaxation, parasympathetic nervous system engagement. And of course, just the emotional experience of receiving non-invasive, gentle, rhythmic, and really compassionate, caring touch is the gold standard there. Like, that's the core of the power, right? Okay. As we zoom in a little bit on breathing, I want to specifically tap on breathing pattern disorder, BPD. Right? That's inconvenient. Inconvenient acronym for us. It's nice to be able to kind of recognize that there may be breathing pattern disorder implied when you see these initials. It might not always be bipolar disorder. Personally, I don't ever chart breathing pattern disorder as an entire like diagnostic. Like, I'm going to be more in the weeds on breaking down which specific impacts I'm seeing. But let's talk about this. So breathing pattern is actually really complex behavior on a neurological level. That there are a ton of muscle fibers involved. There are a ton of sensory receptor organs monitoring it. Coordination of breathing is a very complicated behavior that the body keeps doing while we're awake while we're asleep, while we're in every different mental state. It has its own set of programs of how to run breath and keep your breath going through. So it is possible, and in fact it's extremely common in the modern world, that we learn a disordered pattern of breathing in the sense that our muscle fiber contraction through the diaphragm is not well coordinated. We're really depending on the intercostals, the muscles running between the ribs, to try to like manage the way that the vacuum is created inside of the rib cage, and even lifting up at the top of the thorax to accommodate the fact that the diaphragm is not engaging fully, right? So take a few moments and feel how that works when you restrict your diaphragmatic breathing. What muscles are actually going to activate? And you guys have gotten much better at recognizing which muscles are activating. You start trying to pull in that breath, but you don't allow the abdomen to really expand with the diaphragm. Yeah, Eva's like getting into her shoulder. We've got that like pectoral engagement. We're gonna have some weird scaling engagement. We're really gonna jump through that sternocleidomastoid. Yeah. And we're gonna try to lift up the top of the rib cage to create the vacuum that we need to be down in the bottom of the abdomen. So if this goes on for many years, you're actually going to sculpt your rib cage to accommodate this disorganized breathing pattern and make it quite difficult to even engage the diaphragm when it is deliberate that you're attempting to engage the diaphragm, right? And the diaphragm can become quite weak from just simply not being activated regularly in that way. So when this has happened, when our mechanical functionality of our breathing pattern has become really compromised, then we're going to see a lot of really strange impacts. We're going to tend to have that system happening with that breathing rate being impacted by the way that the inhale and the exhale is dysregulated. The carbon dioxide levels in the blood are going to be too high. And then they're going to drop really quickly and be quite low. And so the acidity of the blood will not only be higher on average, but it'll be kind of womping up and down, like becoming irregular. And that's really stressful on all the tissues of the body, to have like irregular access to oxygen versus carbon dioxide. Gas exchange happening on the cellular level is impacting all the cells of the body, right? You're going to have cardiovascular effects. A lot of like tachycardia, palpitations, missed beats, arrhythmia kind of stuff is actually really directly connected to irregularities in oxygenation in the blood coming from the lungs, because the heart is always trying to accommodate the necessity for oxygen, and it's reading the body what amount of oxygen we need and trying to adjust for that. Is very confusing for the actual muscle of the heart to produce true rhythmic heart rate variability, adjusted, calibrated, like well-behaved heart activity when the availability of oxygen in the blood is erratic. We're going to have neurological effects. Again, this is all connected to the oxygenation of the blood pretty strongly. Dizziness, unsteadiness, feeling unstable, kind of like vague anemic sensations that might not show up on blood readings because they're not really connected to how many red blood cells you have or how well your hemoglobin is holding the oxygen. It's just the rate of flow of oxygen is too low. So people will have symptoms that look very much like anemia, and it'll be kind of mysterious. Phlebotomists will tend to like, look at it and be like, well, your blood is fine. We don't know what to tell you, but that will still have those neurological effects. Migraines absolutely can be connected to that. Paresthesia, which is, you guys remember what paresthesia means.
Aesthesia is like sensation, right?
Right, aesthesia is sensation.
So is it that like paralysis almost? Like body, I don't know.
Yeah, it's our parallel sensation. And so that's as we have the sensations that we would expect based on the actual environmental impact on the body. But we also have some additional sensations, such as the numbness, tingling, pins and needles sensations, even like aching numbness, or those like generalized aches that are not related to anything going on in the tissue.
Like a trigger point, like having an effect on some
Right,
other
the
part of
trigger
the body.
points will often kick off a paresthesia experience. But if you even just think of like sitting on your foot and you just let your foot fall asleep and it gets like super pins and needles-y, right? Ultimately, it's the oxygen availability to the nerve itself that's creating that sensation. That the nerve needs access to oxygen in order to transmit useful information, and when it doesn't have that, it's going to send garbled static, okay? And so when the body overall is running an unpredictable, fluctuating, or overall low level of oxygen because of a breathing disorder, then any random place in the body can suddenly start chaotically producing bits of paresthesia. This becomes extremely distracting, and it feels like going crazy for people when they're like, there's weird little sensations popping off, and it's like any random place in my body. I could be having a random, like it's distracting. Like you're constantly turning your attention to, ooh, what was that? Is it a real thing? Is it not a real thing? Like, and again, because we know that the breathing pattern disorder is really tightly related with like anxiety syndromes generally, that we're going to tend to have weirder breath when we're overall activated and anxious. And we're also going to tend to get rather anxious feeling from all the sensations of dysregulated breath. And so this is a tightly knit, self-reinforcing catch-22 situation that people can go really deep into and have no idea that like taking over the rhythm of their breath is literally the final point where they could interrupt so many different facets of what they're experiencing in their sensory world, right?
Does lying prone not limit the diaphragm for people? Like the pressure on the diaphragm, it's like, I don't know, I feel like I've felt that before where I was like, I'm not fully relaxedly breathing at the top of the massage because I haven't had anything yet.
Okay.
So do people have that? I don't know, I'm kind of thinking out loud right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, we definitely have some constriction, right? And if we have a breathing pattern that is chaotic normally, then when we get on the table, we're likely to have even just kind of fascia restrictions or muscle weakness throughout the abdominal area, where the diaphragm is now having to lift the spine, it's having to lift in resistance to your super tight QL, whatever's going on there. So it can feel constricted at the beginning, but again, it's literally the practice of taking over your breath pattern, letting yourself tune into those locations of resistance and still breathing into them even they're like, I can't do it, like that you've got these little points in you trying to tell you there's no room for breath here, like we're just shitty at breathing, and like we eventually actually have a huge amount of power by taking over the instruction of breathing from that subconscious pattern that's been reactivating for like millions and millions of breaths while we're awake and while we're asleep, and actually retraining the muscles of breath through direct instruction instead of letting them just be reactive to the external environment and the miscellaneous sensations.
And is paresthesia a condition, or is that something just like a symptom?
Yeah, it's just a descriptor for a phenomenon, a sensation.
It's more likely to happen if you have DPD, right, breathing.
Right, having super chaotic, like multi-zone paresthesia can be a big piece of breathing pattern disorder. It also is something that we would expect to see as like type 2 diabetes onsets deeper in, and a handful of other conditions that are, for whatever reason, neurological function is becoming erratic. Like Parkinson's also could get some of that going on. So lots of different places where paresthesia could come in, and all people experience paresthesia woven in and out of our daily lives to some extent. That by itself isn't a huge concern, but it's one of the pieces that is really troublesome for people who are deep in anxiety complexes or deep in breathing pattern dysfunction. Okay? Yeah.
It's interesting that it says that the paresthesia could present as limbs feeling out of proportion or as if they don't belong.
Yes.
That's weird.
Yes. Right. And that has to do with our mental mapping of where our body is in space. And we've talked about that before, that kind of using that cerebellum coordination effects of jostling, stuff like that, that we're trying to give the body the kind of feedback where it can adjust the little measurement readers of those nerve sensors so that the mind has a concept of the body that is accurate in space. But it's quite possible for that to diverge a lot, and that's actually a big piece in a lot of like eating disorders, even, where people are not able to visually calibrate their own appearance to the mirror, and because the sensation in their body of being too big is like when they're closing their eyes, they're just feeling it, and it's just dysmorphia is what we call that, when the internal perception of the body is really diverged from what the body actually is doing or looks like or feels like. It gets super inaccurate. So back to that breathing pattern disorder, we've got that impact on the neurology. Also respiratory effects. Obviously, if we have a breathing disorder, we're going to feel some weird respiratory effects. We're going to be aware of shortness of breath, those sensations of like dizziness that are related to our breathing rhythm will come up. Tightness or a sense of oppression, heaviness, or compression in the chest. And quite likely an irritable cough will tend to push away a sensation of compression through the chest, tightness of the chest, which is often just the muscles around the sternum really being so locked up from habitually having to jerk up and jolt the breath into rhythm, that constriction just feels annoying, and we want to cough it away. That semi-involuntary extra spasm of coughing helps engage the diaphragm a little bit and gives us a little bit of relief from that upper respiratory sensation. Difficulty breathing or asthma, and this is there's asthma proper, where you have actual kind of inflammation in the trachea and the upper bronchioles are distressed as tissue, but the sensation of asthma that people will get as the breath flow is so depressed that they're feeling that sensation as well. Air hunger. This is describing, like, have you guys ever, I don't know, maybe been in a cold place where you were trying to fall asleep, but it was so freaking cold, and so you pulled the blanket up over your head and you breathe the warm air, but eventually you can just tell that the oxygen level of the air that you're breathing is dropping too low, and you just get that sensation that's like I have to open the blanket up. Air hunger. And that will come into effect for people with these really extreme breathing pattern dysfunctions. It will be happening all the time. All the time. Inability to take a satisfying breath, or excessive sighing, yawning, and sniffing. So all kinds of different involuntary little actions where the body is doing everything that it can to force you to get a little bit more oxygen because you're just running low all the time.
Oh, is that why like dogs yawn a lot when they're anxious?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, and generally people will tend to, like, even just the sensation of how you get so tired at the end of a day where you've had to challenge yourself, push through some anxiety, do a performance or whatever, you know, it's like exhausting at the end of the day. Like we actually are metabolizing oxygen at a way higher rate under those conditions. The heart rate's a little faster and it adds up over the day.
You're like relaxed, but your brain doesn't know what to do. So
it's just giving you more. We're also going to see gastrointestinal effects. I know this is like a relatively small box in the textbook that I'm spending a lot of time on, but like it's such a big deal.
It sounds like just learning how to breathe properly. Just
change someone's life.
So many
absolutely.
Effects on the body and mind.
Very much so. And of course, we're talking about relatively extreme cases where all these things are going on, but like realistically, all people have some quality of breathing dysfunction impacting some area of their life, unless they're spending like just a huge amount of time on meditation, yoga, and stuff. Gastrointestinal effects. We're going to get some impact on our ability to swallow, our comfort with chewing and eating, our efficiency with coordinating the acid. So we're having like acid regurgitation and heartburn, and just disorganized digestion, because that peristalsis that's trying to happen through the intestines is also driven by the rhythm of the diaphragmatic breathing pushing into the abdomen. And so all of the digestive organs are also going to become relatively disordered and arrhythmic without that ongoing diaphragmatic breath. Muscular effects, of course, everywhere through the body, having more chaotic access to oxygen, you're going to have a stronger tendency towards kind of awkward cramping or twitching or just uncoordinated sensations, but especially through the neck, shoulders, upper chest area, where those muscles are being constantly strained in a way that's quite inefficient. Is not at all ergonomic for us to attempt to get that lung scale vacuum out of the top of the chest. Like these muscles are designed to limit how far off one direction the head drops. They're not designed to pick up this like massive structure of the torso over and over and over and over, right? Psychological effects, tension, anxiety, unreal sensations, depersonalization, feeling out of the body. So these are all aspects of like dissociation, that sense of struggling to track reality, because you're literally disengaged from reality, because the rhythm of time that's installed in our system is like not landing right. And so tracking how time is flowing, tracking where we are in space, where our limbs are in space, it becomes very difficult for the cognitive layer to actually stay coordinated and engaged there. Will become much more prone to confusion with hallucinations, fear of insanity, panic phobias, and agoraphobia. And that's like, of course, they're gradients. But when you do see people who are going into panicking, phobia, agoraphobia, you will not see them breathing diaphragmatically. Like, messing up your breathing system might not make you completely panic. For a while, you may be able to put off completely panicking for a good amount of time. But nobody who is actively panicking is effectively, smoothly operating the diaphragm and engaging that breath. It's just not how it works. And that's exactly why they tell you, like, breathe into a paper bag, or like try to coach your breathing, lengthen out your breathing. That like the height of a panic experience is basically defined by being finally aware of how chaotic your breathing is, and it's scaring you worse. Because it feels like a disconnect from life itself if we can't access breath. General effects: feeling of weakness, exhaustion, impaired concentration, memory, and performance, disturbed sleep, including nightmares, emotional sweating. And this is distinctly when the endocrine system is involved in highly active sweating. We're going to see that in the axilla, the armpits, and the palms of the hands, especially hyperhidrosis, we'll call that a lot of the time. And these are conditions that, interestingly, actually respond fairly well to body work, respond really well to hypnosis. And anything that responds well to hypnosis, we know is a stress amplification symptom, right? And vice versa. Anything that we know is getting worse with the level of stress in somebody's life, we can expect parasympathetic activation to be of assistance in mitigating that sensation. So even if we're not doing targeted cognitive work, the body work activation of the parasympathetic nervous system is going to impact all these conditions some amount and create more stability. And confusion, being low oxygen, being disorganized breathing pattern, having our gas exchange rhythm become erratic is inherently confusing. The information that we're receiving from the system is poorly related and takes a lot of mental effort to understand what our body might be trying to tell us at that point. Yeah.
Since this is so closely related to the things that people will be doing on the table, breathing and regulating their breath.
Yeah.
Is there more leniency towards suggesting, hey, I've noticed you've had a lot of like breathing, heavy breathing, irregular breathing, so I want you to know about this syndrome or this disorder.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that wouldn't be diagnosis, that would be suggestion.
Well, again, you don't necessarily have to tell them you have a disorder. You can tell them your diaphragm's not engaging when you take this breath, but your neck muscles are. Right? So you can pick out what aspect you think they actually could create conscious intervention on, draw their attention to that, and assist them on re-experiencing, becoming aware, drawing that consciousness in to activate that part of the body more efficiently. And it's gonna follow. Like when you make an improvement on one aspect of what's going on here, the rest of it is naturally going to become more organized. They'll get relief pretty quickly, and especially in cases that are dramatic already, where people are suffering, where they're having a lot of paresthesia, they're tingling, they're confused, they're disoriented, they're hyperventilating, they're on the verge of panic, they feel anemic even when they lay down, their sleep is disrupted. Like when they're in the worst level of chaos on this breathing pattern issue, even a tiny improvement of a few of the fibers of their diaphragm becoming more coordinated and like 4 minutes of more standard oxygenation because you're guiding them through that breathing rhythm, like the amount of shift that they can make and they can experience, like it's oxygen, it's breathing, it's fast as fuck. Like it will help a lot really quickly. And so it's pretty wonderful the amount of results that you can get, and people will be stunned when they really make that progress.
Is there a specific muscle that's like the best to target for diaphragm? Because the diaphragm has a muscle.
Oh, go straight in for the muscle. Yeah, just go straight in for the diaphragm. Yeah. And you can, if you're wanting to get into like breath coaching and stuff, there's a lot of more specific resources to go into that, but we are absolutely equipped with the baseline level that you guys are going to leave school with. Like you're totally equipped to just notice like this breathing isn't working. Sense in for where is it the most disrupted, and especially some people will have really uneven side to side. Like you want to restore the symmetry of the breath, you want to restore the smoothness of the action of the breathing pattern, and you can simply lay your hand on and ask them to follow your hand. So if you know that healthy diaphragmatic breathing is going to be that kind of umbrella structure at the bottom of the ribs, descending that way, then you're just going to ask them to, like, with your breath, with your sensation of breathing, not your clenching of your abdominal muscles, but your sensation of breathing, follow my hand. And you're going to lay the pathway of where that pressure should go. And then follow it back in.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
all the way down here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's, the bell shape is just hooked up under those lower ribs all the way around into the spine. Yep. And so you're going to want the abdomen to lift rhythmically, smoothly. You'll have people that their breath looks like they're just giving up on the intake partway through. Or you'll have people that have really catching breath where the diaphragm is spasming or is hitting resistance from other muscles as it either intakes or releases. You're just drawing attention to it. Like, just they're noticing, because they already know, like, breath should be like, they already know. And so just helping them acknowledge that what they're doing is technically not breathing. And they're going to automatically start to pull their function closer to that average, and they're going to get wild results of increase of comfort, increase of coordination between all these different body systems relatively quite quickly. We already talked a little bit about those general effects, psychological effects. We've also got the cerebrovascular effects, which tend to be experienced in overlap. That dizziness, blurring of consciousness, decrease in cortical inhibition, tearfulness, and emotional instability. So all of this also sounds like being really run down. This is because being run down is usually what has happened at the end of a period of time where our rhythmic control of our breath has been weakened a bit. That we put out a lot of emotional effort at some kind of event, or like pushing ourselves through a week of extra difficult work or whatever, and we do a less cohesive job of coordinating our breathing patterns in those cases. So slowing down, taking time, and do not forget, for your own personal benefit as a practitioner that needs to put out a lot of energy and needs to stay very grounded, the power that you have inside of yourself to take those resets. 10 seconds is going to make some difference in your neurological control of yourself. 1 minute is going to make some difference in your overall neurological coordination. 10 minutes is going to let your endocrine system start catching up. Like, small marker points of where you can actually do pretty impactful restorative work on your own system. That is our overall overview of the breathing pattern disorder, the huge amount of impact that's going on with that. And I want to just wrap that up with a bit of a zoom out on why we get like that. We were not always bipeds. We used to have our neck muscles holding our heads out in front of space in front of us, and that neck muscle structure was pretty different when we mostly operated as though we were quadrupeds, right? And from that position, it might make a lot more sense to picture it that way, but we have these sets of reflexes. I don't know if you've seen babies activate the Moro reflex. Has anybody seen that before? When you take a baby and maybe you're like adjusting it, and like hopefully you're not actually dropping the baby, but for whatever reason you kind of startle it in space and it drops a little fast, and it'll go like, it'll like spider out, right? That's called the Moro reflex. So that's one of the like really early ones that tends to recede over time. But one of our other like very ancient reflexes is an attack reflex, where when we anticipate conflict, and again, this can be internal or external anticipation, imagining that somebody is mad at you can have just as much impact on how this reflex works, right? Is this contraction pattern where we're going to cover the carotid, we're going to lock it down, we're going to bring the head closer into the chest and the heart and brain are going to be like somewhat less accessible to the outside field. So it's a very ingrained, evolutionary rooted reflex pattern that tends to drop us and curl us. And when we're activating that all the time, that's when we're going to really get that weird lifting, breathing pattern.
And I can almost like have an unconscious bias towards that if people are naturally like typing or like hunched over for
Exactly.
daily life.
Exactly. Is our daily life is really migrating us into physically telling ourselves that we're under attack. Mm-hmm.
You need to start typing like this.
Super subconscious. Yeah, have like I'm in a bliss activation keyboard. That'd be great. Cool. Awesome. You guys did great. That was a big piece. I get a little intense on that one. Thanks for hanging out. Let's take a pause and we'll come back in 10 minutes or so.